and also on our Zoom channel. I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar today, which is on the future of African television. And really excited to have a great conversation with a great group of panelists, which is going to be moderated by Russell Southwood. Russell has a lot of years experience in technology and telecoms and media and entertainment and broadcast. Balancing Act Africa is where he does his work. And Russell, thanks a lot for being with us today. And I'm going to let Nkiru say a quick word before we just kick off. Nkiru.
Oh, I don't really have much to say apart from welcome everybody and thank you for being here. This has been an amazing journey so far and we're really grateful that you're here to share your knowledge and deep insight on the future of TV in Africa. Russell, over to you.
Hi, welcome everybody to this webinar on African television now and the future. I'm going to do three things at the beginning here. I'm going to give you a structure to how it's going to go. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and I'm going to make a few sort of short remarks to, in a sense, seed the conversation. After that, it will be a conversation. So panelists, if you want to get my attention to speak, if you can either send me a chat message or you can wave. My difficulty is I can't see you all on the bar at the top. I will move it backwards and forwards to check whether you're waving rather than drowning. And so to go into it straight away. So the first thing will be the introductions, where people will talk about what they do, their growth story, and what the key challenges are that are being faced by African broadcasting. Then we'll get into the meat of it. And the meat of it is really the analysis, which is what's wrong, what's happening at the moment that's not going right, and what can be done about that. And then the last part will be questions, both from the panelists and perhaps from people participating more widely, but certainly from the panelists. So the panel today is Theo Asampong, who is the CEO of WAPS, which is a satellite platform, which is owned by SES and operates in Ghana and Nigeria. That is a very interesting story, and he'll tell you more about that as we go on. We have Chichi Nwoko, who has very broad experience in the entertainment industry and the broadcast industry, and was last country manager of Kwesi Free Sports, and also in her past was Optima, which is another sports thing. We have Sam Onyemelukwe, who is the MD of Trace Anglophone West Africa, so good music experience there. We have Mark Lewis will join us in a while, who is the CEO of Bravig, and he also does Sports Tracker app and Markinator Studios, and he deals with recorded music and so on and so forth. So does distribution of music in the background there. And last but not least, Wangeci Murage, who is the founder of Media Pros Africa. She is Kenyan and has worked for Mnet and Wangeci, who runs the Zuku brand, so has pay TV experience. So that's all the people that are there. So I'm going to make some very, very brief remarks to get things going. And I'd like to start by saying I think that African broadcasting, there's a kind of triple threat to African broadcasting. With DTT, there are more channels, and this is great for viewers, but advertising is spread more thinly across, but advertising appears to be growing. But actually, when you scratch that surface, there's really deep discounts. And so actually, it's a flat or shrinking market. So there's a difficulty there. If we take it into Nigeria itself, DTT in Nigeria is in a mess. It's been relaunched, but I leave people from Nigeria to describe what they think of that. The second threat really is the wider low-cost pay TV offers. And this, again, is good for the consumer, but maybe less good for the free-to-air people. So the GoTVs, the Star Times, and so on and so forth are there. And that produces more diverse content, more content for people to look at, make comparisons with, and say, am I happy with this? Am I happy with that? The third thing is the hardest one to read, I think, but is happening, is that things are moving online. So you have everything from Netflix at the smart and shiny end to Iroko TV, Ibaka TV, all of those kind of people at the other end. Youth are consuming content differently. There's increased digital ad spend. So if you increase digital ad spend, it comes out from someone else's budget, and that may be broadcasting, it may be billboards, whatever, but whatever. There's a small but very successful number of Nigerian YouTube channels, which includes people like Mark Angel Comedy, Channels TV, Onyezi TV, and so on and so forth. So these are people who have millions and millions of views on YouTube, so are actually benefiting from this move online. I think the last thing that's worth mentioning in this particular part of it is I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying he'd launched a service which was Naira 3000 at launch, and Naira 3000 was worth about $18 at that point. It's now worth about $6. And in a year's time, probably will fall to, I don't know, maybe $5. It's got to go down. It's keeping going down. So the value of the Naira keeps declining. The upside of that is maybe that domestic production is cheaper, question mark. We'll see. My second set of comments is I've just completed a survey of 40 African broadcasters during COVID-19. I can't give you the details, but I'll give you the headlines because I think the headlines are interesting. Over half want to move more viewing online. They can see that trend happening to internet, and so they want to go multimedia platform. One of the people I spoke to said we have to be on all platforms. Now, obviously, there's implications of that, and we can talk about that. The second thing was that lower ad revenues and the need for new ad revenues, and just under half of the people said that. Talked to people who had lost 70% of their advertising, 50% of their advertising, very slow coming back. The third thing is taking production online. Now, the simplest thing is what we're all doing here, which is Zoom. You produce content on a cloud-based communication platform. But the more complicated version of that, and several people have had a conversation with me about it, is that you would sit at your laptop at home and all of the production stuff would be up in the cloud. So you wouldn't need to be in the office necessarily to do what you do. Just under half of people said, we have to look at that, that's what we're doing. The fourth thing, and this is about a quarter of the people spoken to, said, we will downsize, we need to upskill. So that's a kind of adjustment process in terms of the costs. Last thing, and the fifth thing, is increase the quality of programming and meet content competition. And this was only a fifth of people. Now, that's a very small number of people out of the totality saying that content is the problem. So last question, which I'll leave to hang in the air, is how do producers get paid? And are you still buying access to get programs onto TV channels? Because it seems to me that's at the heart of the difficulties that producers have in Africa and across the continent, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So I want to start by asking Chichi Nwoko to say a little bit about what you do and what your story is and what you think the challenges too, maybe choose two of the challenges. So Chichi, if you would kick us off. If you can turn your mic on.
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you so much, Russell. That was a very spot on introduction. I think kind of laid the groundwork for what we'll discuss today. I also want to greet the rest of my panel members that are here. So my name is Chichi Nwoko. I'm the managing director of What's On, which is a multimedia consulting and production company. I also serve as an associate, which has sports rights as free-to-air sports rights for Premier League and Olympics, among others. And I've recently as executive director for InView, heading up content channels and marketing. Now, InView is the company that's been appointed by NBC to lead the digital transition. And so in essence, move Nigeria from analog to digital. Russell, you kind of mentioned the struggles in that area, but hopefully we can kind of talk to that, as we progress.
Definitely come back to that.
Yeah, but I basically started my broadcast career over 20 years ago, working for a mix of either affiliate or owned stations of either NBC, CBS, ABC, and then moved back to Nigeria a little over 10 years ago. And in my position, I worked as an account executive. So the crux of how we monetize television broadcasting is in essence sales, right? And so there's a very scientific approach in terms of ratings, how much you sell each cost per point, so that everyone is aware, right? So the stations are aware how to cost their inventory. Agencies have a good grasp on what advertising costs, and identifying the big challenges facing our market. One is adequate audience measurement and research. We would attack the books and the numbers every morning, look at the overnights to see what's doing well, what's not doing well, what's our story, how do we sell these numbers? Whereas here, a lot of the audience numbers come in 2-3 months after the fact, right? So you're very much dealing with very dated numbers, which are also in question. The second problematic is subpar content. And that's both in terms of the quality of the production and the selection of the content, right? So you can't select great content if you don't have research and if you have measurement. And that's probably the biggest problem because, and I'll wrap up very quickly, but the broadcast industry needs to quickly pivot and think of themselves as content producers, right? Broadcast is just a channel. It's not our business anymore. Like if we think of it as that, we're going to die. So if you don't have great content to depend, right? Great content, then we're in a very shaky place. So those are my two things that I feel are threatening the business of broadcasters across the continent right now.
Chichi, thank you. I think you're absolutely right about thinking of yourself as content producers, because actually increasingly other people run the platforms. It's not, you know, exactly. The broadcast executive in Africa no longer says to himself, you know, I've got these masts all around the country and I have to look after that. You know, you have to have somebody to chase and make sure you're on air, but you know, that's not the big concern. So I want to come to Wangeci, and Wangeci is the one who is the person, one of the people who is from outside Nigeria. So Wangeci, speak to how it looks from Kenya.
Thanks, Russell. And again, a pleasure meeting you all, both internally and externally, the people who are watching us on live stream. Just a brief introduction about myself. I'm a media consultant. My company is called Media Pros Africa. You can check me out online. What we basically do is mainly handle strategy development. And this is in the area of content and channel development as well. We also look at content marketing, distribution aspects, of course, which includes acquisition, training and talent management, and events management in a nutshell. With regards to the way I look at the industry, definitely there's a shift. Things are changing, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that. And we cannot say that we are going to do things as they were being done before. And I completely agree with what some of the things that Chichi has said, because there has to be some things that have to change. For me personally, I think some of the things that I feel going forward in terms of the progression in television broadcasting is, and this is one thing I've always said, is we have to find, we have to be niche. We have to target our consumers. If we do not differentiate ourselves from the different broadcasters, then it becomes less competitive. And at times, even the advertisers then really don't have much of a choice as to where it is to go. So if you're going to be a faith-based channel, be faith-based. If you're gonna do cartoons or kids programming, do kids. And find your advertisers, you know, from those specific regions and that target market. The second one is, I think there needs to be a lot of, because we are talking about African TV, a lot of investment in African content. A lot of investors, sponsors have come in, even NGOs, trying to support the industry. But I don't know whether it's enough or maybe it's just not being produced correctly, but it's still not enough because we still find a lot of, especially when it comes to free to air, we still find a lot of our free to air stations importing a lot of content, which is not good. And when you go to pay TV, at least you have a selection. You know, you can decide what it is that you want to watch, but on free to air, you really don't have a choice. It's whatever it is that, that you're presented with. So I would like to see a little bit more investment, at least in content, African content development that would help propel, you know, our stories and basically just our careers and our future. I was going to mention another one, but since you said two, I'm going to leave it at that.
That's very kind of you. So yeah, there are far too many African free-to-air channels that are, if you speak to the people, they will say this is for everybody. And for everybody means that you ends up all looking a bit the same. It's a kind of 70s, 80s kind of programming template.
Yeah.
Sam, I'd like to bring you in because I think Trace is very different in this conversation. And so explain who you are and give your perspective.
Sure. Well, my name is Sam Onyemelukwe, excuse me. Sam Onyemelukwe, and I'm the managing director for Trace. For one cluster, one quarter of Africa, which is the Western cluster. I also senior vice president for marketing and advertising globally for us. And yeah, we're in a completely different scenario because first of all, we're pay TV. And so the bulk of our revenues actually come from carriage fees through our contracts with DSTV, Wangeci, CanalSat, etc., and about 80 other contracts that we carry across the globe. And so that's one aspect. And then in addition, because of our observations many years ago about the African media space, basically we reverted to 99% no content expenses apart from paying music video rights to air the music videos. So we produce very little. We're doing more and more because it is a diversified environment, of course. So those two things mitigate for us the exposures, to both to the advertising and number two to the demands and expenses around content. So it is a different scenario, but I think overall we are, we're seeing the writing on the wall and have been seeing the writing on the wall for some years as well, and do still feel some of that pain because a good chunk of our revenues still come from the brands, between our advertising and sponsorships. So and of course, as the democratization of content is well underway, if we could even should be talking about it in past tense. So we're also feeling that. So but for us, rather than jumping in and going into producing more and more and more content, which we are doing certainly, and there's more of a competition obviously for content, we still feel that it's very, very, very crucial to be very as inexpensive as possible when producing content. Whereas, because unlike the West, where there's multiple windows and then syndication options and multiple distribution options, very limited options to recover and recoup the prices spent out. So I won't raise any additional issues except to just answer that question at this point.
Okay. Mark, good to see you're with us. I'd like to bring you in next. If you could say what it is you do, and what the two key challenges for you are from the perspective that you have.
Okay, so I have two core strands to the business. The business from Bravig grew from distribution. We started probably about 2003, 2004 with an output deal with SABC, SABC 1, SABC 2, when we were selling crime and investigation dramas into SABC, and then also local dramas, probably about 3,000 to 4,000 hours. So we kind of do volume kind of content sales. Then also had a very long business relationship with Chichi, you probably know, with Optima Sports, leveraging commercial relationships with broadcasters in East Africa and in Tanzania, Uganda, sort of seaboard, creative advertising deals around the sports properties. I also run Sport Shaka, which is a rights acquisition specified and focused on emerging sports, emerging African sports, and distributing them internationally. And then some premium titles that we're distributing exclusively on mobile and in Africa, and also advising on a couple of funds which are facing local African production and content. I definitely err towards the side of what Chichi was saying about understanding the numbers, understanding the growth the growth potential on the continent. I am a firm believer in the value of local language content and the ability for growth in the local language sphere. I definitely believe that the FTA broadcasters do not always work hard enough to understand the nature of their audience. And I think, and I'm going to throw a couple of things in here. I think that the continent is still reeling from the collapse of Kwesi. A lot of people don't necessarily understand that when Kwesi came out, not only did they buy carriage satellite deals, but they invested in maybe 20 to 30 broadcasters across the continent. There was over $200 million spent in acquiring shares in broadcasters who were looking to build their capacity. When Kwesi fell, those broadcasters who were reliant on their business model then also collapsed. And as a direct result of that and a lack of competition, Star Times then decided to pay less per hour for content and make sort of 3-month and 90-day payment windows as opposed to 30 days. And DSTV, MultiChoice also kind of put an edict out there that they would be paying slightly less for content because there wasn't a major player besides Canal Plus, etc., to be able to bid against the content. I think that it's really important that broadcasters understand that investing in producers is the future of content. Some see producers as purchasers or acquirers of airtime. In the long term, I think globally, you can look at Latin America, we can look at Korea, we can look at the Far East. I think that selling and monetizing airtime as a commodity outside of the advertising model is a dying commodity. And I think that ultimately you have to reward producers by increasing the per hour rate. And you can see that in America with some of the super dramas that we watch and that we consume on the continent, and we struggle to kind of keep up. I also feel that as much as I love local language, the move of African Magic to move away from Pan-Africanism to local African content hurt the transformation and the movement of African content. So there are Swahili shows that are at 300 to 400 to 500 episodes that do extremely well on the East African that nobody has any idea of in West Africa, and it undermined the price point and the volume for Nigerian content in East Africa also. So whilst localization of the strands has built local producers, it's also stopped the traveling of content, and I think content needs to travel all over the continent. So that's my 2 cents or 2.5
Mark,
cents.
that's very helpful. I think Africa is in a very unusual position because it relies, the real money comes out of DSTV,
Yeah.
Canal Plus,
Yeah.
and as you were saying, until recently, Kwesi, who hoppered an enormous amount of dollars into a large hole and then it disappeared. But free-to-air broadcasters, which in more developed markets, are the people who buy. There's very small budgets. So I'd like to, last but not least, come to Theo, who is in a sense the tech man on the panel. Theo, give us some background, because you have a very interesting platform, and give us some sense of what you think the challenges are.
Great, thanks, Russell, and hello to everyone. So Theo Asampong is my name. I'm the CEO of a small company called West Africa Platform Services, a joint venture business between SES, a satellite company most of you probably heard of, and KNET, a local partner. What do? We simply take single channels and put them on our DTH platform. Now, this platform, actually, I must say, was set up or was started about 10 years ago between Multi-TV, you've had Multi-TV, and KNET, a local technical provider. Now, when we came in at SES around 2014, the platform was struggling a bit, so we invested money into it, and we moved it from 25 channels to now over 100 channels, 100 single channels on satellite, and not to mention the other 40 plus channels on the DTT and analog channels that exist. I think in Ghana today we have probably over 200 single channels in operation. Well, so for me, funding has been one of the biggest problems I think these broadcasters are facing, because they're not able to pay us. They need to pay us for us to put them on the satellite. And I think the funding problem comes from the fact that the advertising revenue is not there. We've spoken about it. Audio measurement data is probably not so widely available to some of these channels, and therefore they're not able to capitalize on it to generate some revenues for their platforms. That means they're not able to produce some real original content. So funding is key. And those who are able to produce content are not able to monetize the content, because sometimes those content end up being pirated. So piracy, I see personal problems here as well. Someone who will spend the money to produce the content, and they'll find that somebody else is broadcasting it elsewhere, and the laws are not tight enough to deal with it. Another area that is having a problem with the funding is too many of these channels. And somebody mentioned syndication, I think it was Sam. I mean, every single channel is going to get the same market for advertising, and they're not making it. So if there's some syndication, perhaps it will work. And this is a technical guy speaking about content stuff. Another problem I find is technical know-how and expertise. Being a technical person, we see this a lot. When we monitor our channels, we see that the production is really not great. Sound is all over the place. Video is something they call phase dominance. You get future pictures coming before present pictures. We have that problem a lot. Yesterday, I went to visit one of my customers who's brought in some new kit, very expensive kit. And he said, Theo, I don't know what to do, because I need to find some really good people to operate this kit. And that's my biggest headache right now, not the money I've spent. And I said, well, I know what you're talking about. Yes, expertise on how to get the sound right, the video right, an area that needs to be looked into. So going back to what WAPS does and SES does, we supported both Ghana and Nigeria to launch their DTT or DSO programs. In Ghana here, we work with a local partner called KNET, who put up all the transmitters. What they do is they use the satellite to feed the transmitters, and the same satellite can be viewed direct to home. So a hybrid solution, as we call it. We did the same thing in Nigeria with InView. Chichi mentioned InView. I know them very well. InView and the NBC, we worked together. I think it was about 4 years ago, we launched that platform. To be honest, I haven't looked into that market much these days because I've been very busy in Ghana, but I know there's some challenges there, and I think, yeah, something needs to be done about the DSO in Nigeria. In Ghana, 42 transmitters. We're only waiting for the minister now to announce the switch off because everyone is watching DTT these days. The last time SES did a survey, there were about 2 million homes already watching the DTT. The rest of them are actually watching our platform. We have 4.4 million homes watching our DTT platform in Ghana, the biggest platform in Ghana and West Africa. So I'll leave it there now, Russell. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. It's very interesting because multi-TV went from being kind of a number 4 or 5 player to being the number 1 player by being on that platform, and that platform being successful. I mean, it did all sorts of things in content terms, but you know, that's kind of an interesting story in itself.
Multi-TV actually started the platform. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So indeed, it well, they struggled at the beginning, but now it's the biggest platform in Ghana with 4.4 million viewers or TV homes.
Yeah. I'd like to ask my first question to Chichi. You're involved with InView. There will be a lot of channels on the Nigerian DTT platform. I want to ask you about, what does a successful African producer do in that context? How is a producer going to make a living out of lots and lots of channels where the pressure the whole time is on to, in a sense, keep content acquisition costs at their lowest? How are we going to square that particular circle? Sorry, we lost Chichi.
Maybe she's muted.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. You're there.
Yeah, so I think you know, a few people have mentioned the fact that I think a lot of times, a lot of channels, and let's just talk about local channels, right? And we're all going after the same advertising dollar. In addition to there being a lot of channels, not only are broadcasters going after that same advertising dollars, but a lot of producers are also going to a lot of the agencies and the brands, right? So that's something that we don't necessarily talk about. So I think the structure, right? And I think the NBC has introduced a new law saying that, you know, well, you can't buy airtime, right? So I think it then channels a system where broadcasters would have to collaborate and work with producers, right? And then jointly, I would encourage a model where they both go to the advertisers and the brands, right? And so in this kind of structure, channels are more vested in the content, right? So I've been on the producer side where we actually had to produce the content, buy the airtime, and because the channels weren't really vested, they didn't care about promoting it. If you needed any promos to push viewers to that channel, you had to pay for that. So I think this new law allows for broadcasters to look at the business and really support as best as they can the producer, right? So that they're both making money, right? As opposed to, once again, having brands and agencies inundated with everyone going to them for money with no real structure. And then the onus, once again, I mean, I think that with DTT and measurement, you know, it will be survival of the fittest, right? Because you're going by the numbers. And one of the key things that we're looking to put in place is audience measurement. So people are not buying based on a hunch, they're buying based on real numbers. And so I think that will then encourage producers to look at what they're producing and make sure that there is some kind of scientific approach to why they're producing what they're producing for the market, and understand where they'll actually monetize that by working very closely with broadcasters that are also now going to be more focused on their market research and their audience numbers that this new solution would provide for them.
I think you used the word collaborate quite early on in what you were saying.
Yes.
How does that work in Nigeria? My experience in Nigeria is that collaboration is as rare as hen's teeth, because actually people always want to do things themselves. They always want to do it their way. How are you going to breed a culture which enables people to work together for mutual success, rather than one guy saying to the other, oh, he's trying to rob me, he's trying to take it away from me?
Well, I mean, I think that there will be no other way forward. So if we're going strictly by the NBC laws, and we're hoping that those can actually be enforced, where a producer can't come to a, let's say, Silverbird anymore and say, okay, I want to buy your 9 p.m., right?
Yep.
Then they're forced to have a different kind of business model, right? Which is, you know, and unfortunately, as it stands right now, I think, I don't want to say your name wrong, Wangeci spoke about investors, right? An investor isn't investing in the broadcast business because they love content. They want to see a path of return, right? And so the African broadcast market is not in a sophisticated space like the US or the UK, that they're getting a bunch of investment that allows them to then invest in the producers. So they would have to collaborate and take a risk together, right? Working with the producer and having their airtime and whatever their sales expertise is, whatever their relationships are with the different agencies, and come up with a model where they can do a rev share. While at Kwese Free Sports as a broadcaster, we did a lot of those deals, and people were actually open to saying, okay, we'll give you our content, right? We have the airtime, we'll promote it for you. Should we do a 60-40 rev share where we actually go and sell your content together? So that the model is very, very clear, right? Obviously, to a certain extent, broadcasters will also be forced to collaborate because the landscape is changing. So you mentioned the Netflixes, the YouTubes that have a lot of this technology in place for audience measurement. So if we're not proactive in working and giving a lot of these producers value, they'll go elsewhere, right? So it might be one of those things where we're actually forced to do outside, and regardless of the challenges that we have in the marketplace, I don't really see an alternative, especially since a lot of these content producers are now saying, okay, you know what, I'll go and for my own channel, right? So broadcasters, you then have to really assess what your value is vis-a-vis a Netflix, a YouTube, an Amazon, and all the other players that will continue to come into the market that are not charging, right? And their business model is actually very different, right? So I'm not charging you a license fee. I'm not charging you satellite. I'm actually working to bring you an audience that's already made. And I already have a commercial model that's very transparent that you can see. So in terms of just, once again, our business model, we're going to be forced to pivot so that we can actually survive.
Yeah, interesting. Sam, Trace has always been very, very successful, or it seems to an outsider, very, very successful at doing precisely what Chichi has been talking about, which is actually getting the brands involved, working with the brands and forming relationships with the brands. Do you think that's feasible more widely, that kind of success, expertise, collaboration?
Absolutely, and I think Chichi touches on it a little bit with the collaboration aspect. But I think look, we have a in general speaking, obviously a bit of an upside down media industry, right? The reason that free to air selling content, selling airtime, is they just got lazy and they got sick of chasing agencies and brands. And they figured to put that risk upon the producers themselves. So, you know, and, you know, obviously we have to accept and factor in that we are on the continent. We're in an immature and developing market with a lot of young entrants who see it as glamorous and don't necessarily understand the business more and more. But so, from the brand perspective, well, first of all, their budgets are smaller because the markets are smaller. So the GDP and the individual buying power is less. So you can't spend, you know, $50 million or $2 million on one event or one TV event. So all those factors play a part. But yes, at the scale that we're at, definitely, I think there's a lot of room for improvement for both broadcasters and producers, and hopefully working in collaboration, as we see, as Chichi was just pointing out, now that it's more about what content is on your channel as opposed to just selling that airtime out. And simply that takes a you know, basic understanding of that advertisers and brands need to spend that money and want to spend that money in effective ways to reach their audiences. It's not a scam, which is sometimes how I feel that producers and, you know, people looking for sponsorship or advertising are. They just go and say, sponsor me, pay for this. And they almost feel like they get away with something when a brand agrees to give the money. Oh, they supported me. No, they're not supporting you. They're there to get their own objective met. And that's been core to, you know, to our success with brands, is that we put center in front the brand's objectives, right? Even beyond our objectives, right? Yeah, we want to have great programming, we want to have, you know, an attractive channel and brand, and we want the viewers. But when it comes time to meet with the brands, so we've always taken a very consultative, you know, agency approach. So we operate in many ways. In fact, what we tell brands, and this is, you know, kind of internal, what we tell brands is we are an agency with a built-in platform. So we come to help you achieve your objectives, and luckily we have a platform to put you on.
Thanks, Sam. That's very, very useful way of thinking about it. Wangeci, reflect on this same issue from the Kenyan perspective, because it's a more mature market in some ways than Nigeria. Dare I say, to a group of people whose origins are Nigerian, but it's nonetheless, I think, very interesting because it has various things that work there in a slightly different way. So Wangeci, what would you say, looking at this producer question?
Are we talking about collaborations? Yeah,
collaborations. How does a producer make a living in this world in which, you know, money appears to be shrinking, number of channels increasing?
I think it's important to also understand there's different collaborations. There's a collaboration between the broadcaster and the producer, and there's the one between producer and producer. And it may be something that, because of the pandemic, that has really helped, I think, the industry right now, is there's a lot of collaboration that is happening from producer to producer. So for example, where you would ordinarily travel to South Africa or Nigeria or Mali or Ghana or somewhere else to produce your film, you find somebody else there to do it for you. And I think there's a lot more interaction that is happening right now. The only downside is that the advertising or the support is still really not there. So in terms of when it comes to spending capacity, when it comes to budget, it's still not as lucrative, but it's still something that is manageable. But also, if you will notice right now, a lot of things are being done online, just like us having this, meeting on Zoom. So even when it comes to production, a lot of things are happening in that way. So do I support collaborations? Absolutely. It's something that I've always advocated for. But I think it still needs to come with a little bit of support, either from advertising or from broadcasters, or maybe even other funding institutions that can be able to come on board to support producers, because in Africa, content production is key, and we know the difficulties that we face. And so it's important that at least we are able to support one another.
I think that's very interesting, that the idea of collaborations between countries, which have happened quite a lot with film and things like that, because it's people get together to shoot in two different sets of locations on the continent. Sam was touching on the way in which DSTV's localization, sub-regionalization of their Africa Magic channels, in a sense, has hit, I guess, the sort of success story of Nollywood, which was the thing that traveled everywhere. In terms of, from your perspective, what is the content that's going to happen in the next 5 years that will travel everywhere across the continent? What's a way of looking at that?
Sorry to correct you. Actually, Mark was saying that, and I thought that was a very interesting point. So
Mark was saying that. Yeah, apologies. You're quite right. Yeah. So the question of content that will travel, the question of content that will make its way around the continent in the next 5 years. I'll leave you to think about that, and I'll come to Mark, who was the man who actually made the comment. Mark, what's your take on? I was asking you, but don't worry. You were looking as if the answer wasn't there. So I'm going to move to Mark. And Mark, you were talking about content that travels. Give us your thoughts on that and how producers can use that to get content that is more than content in one market.
I think I'm going to touch on what I think producers need to do in order to accelerate their kind of revenue gain. But I want to touch something about advertising and brand relationships, because we use that to support some live sport. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of note for producers, very often producers will swamp towards an agency, and the agency already has inset spends, inset relationships with broadcasters, and sometimes they see new ideas as the enemy because it dilutes their existing spend, because they don't want to do the work to go and get new budgets or new advertisers or new brand relationships. They want to go to the same old brands and hopefully get more money for less effort.
Yeah.
So sometimes some of the most exciting, or maybe the sexier deals that we've done have been with brands that are not represented by agencies. And I want to say there are a lot of brands in Africa who are not represented by any agencies when it comes to their media spend. Definitely across the manufacturing, definitely across infrastructure deals. Some of them, they can't even spell the word media agency, rather than let alone have an adult relationship with them. And those brands tend to be more open when they see a long-term solution for their business and for their advertising needs. That's the first thing I was going to say. Second, and so I think for producers, sometimes it's not always about speaking to the agency, but it's about developing relationships with brands where they can have a synergy in terms of locally they can deliver a service to that brand. And sometimes producers are scared to speak to brands because they feel that the agency is better at translating their needs. And I think that that's not always the case. Secondly, I think there are two types of advertising deals. There is a gut reaction deal and there's an empirically based deal. The gut reaction is, I like this group, I like this producer, I like this show, I'd like to be associated with it. How much is it going to cost me? And there's the empirical deal. What is the visibility that this product is going to give me at 9 p.m.? What is the increase in terms of audience share? How much client spend can I retain? What is going to be the brand visibility of my name after this campaign is finished? And as an executive at Coca-Cola once said, how many cans of Coke will I actually sell while this advertisement is on air on the channel? And I think that producers have to get comfortable with the idea that they're there sometimes as a tool to increase the brand's revenue. And so when we deliver marketing campaigns, they're empirically based, because at the end of the day, that brand manager has to go at the end of the year into his boardroom and say, this is how I spent the money and this was the return on investment. And so I think that producers have to grow up and deliver for the brands, so that the brands will keep coming back and spending if they feel that, the agencies are saturated, as as a couple of people have said, which is true. In terms of what producers need to do, I think I'm going to put a really simple analogy that relates to Netflix. 6 or 7 years ago, there's probably very few people on this panel who would have gone crazy about a Spanish language speaking telenovela about Colombian drug cartels. And Netflix worked out that there were potentially 1 million viewers in 400 million Americans who would be passionate about that particular program. And all the other broadcasters laughed at them. I remember 2003 seeing their sales tent at Midcom and everybody just kind of walking past. But what they didn't turn around and say is that the 1 million viewers that were passionate about, say, watching Narcos would be replicated in 30 other countries that would have up to 1 million Spanish-speaking people. And when you look at 30 countries paying $10 a month, one sort of 30 million households, that's 3.6 billion a year off of one show. I think the key here is looking at the diaspora and where there is a pocket of 50,000 to 100,000 diaspora homes around the world, and what connects the diaspora together and what they will connect with in terms of continent that reminds them of home, because that's where the future is.
Mark, I think all of that is bang on the money, and it's back to Wangeci's notion of niche. It's niche in a very different way. It's niche internationally rather than niche within a country.
Yeah.
I want to move the conversation on at this point. I want to get everybody to think about new sources of revenue, new business models, the implications of being multi-platform, because you're no longer a broadcaster who has a TV channel. You're a broadcaster that has, a satellite feed to a satellite platform. You have a social media, you have a website, you have all of these different outlets. But how does the money come out of that process? And I want to talk to Theo first, because the point of the satellite platform that Theo has put up in Ghana and with SES and in Nigeria as well is to create a different business model. And I'd like him to talk about how that might come about.
Okay, so thanks, Russell. Can you go for that one more time for me, please, with regards to?
Yeah, sure. What I was saying was broadcasters are now having to look at multi-platform. They're having to look at being on DTT, satellite, sometimes pay TV, sometimes, social media, YouTube, Netflix, on and on you go, whole range of platforms. What's the point of having a satellite platform? How is a African broadcaster going to make money out of being on that satellite platform?
Okay, great. Well, Russell, in Africa, a lot of people don't have access to the broadband that you need to enjoy your Netflixes, your other OTT platforms, and so on. Again, when it comes to pay TV, if you look at the numbers, I mean, we did a survey end of last year, pay TV penetration about 10%. So a lot of people can't afford to go pay TV. So if you look at that, if you look at those two alone, it means that as a channel or a broadcaster, you're getting more audience on a satellite distribution platform. So because we reach everywhere, it's ubiquitous. So for African
Theo, can I ask you not to bang the table when you talk, because it makes it hard to hear you. Sorry, go on.
For African countries, we really must rely on satellite to get wider distribution, to get the biggest audiences. And this is what we've been trying to do. There are over 10 million homes that watch our platform in sub-Saharan Africa alone, right? So it's great for a broadcaster if you have the right content, if you can tap into the right audiences, if you can get the right brands to follow you, you could make a lot of money. You could really get your business going. But we talked about the proliferation of TV channels. There are too many of those channels fighting over the same brands, going after the same brands, after the same source of revenue, and so on. So yes, satellite for me is here to stay for a very long time because of the infrastructure deficiencies that we have within the continent.
Okay, so the answer in terms of the business model of the satellite platform is advertising, and yeah, in the longer term maybe pay TV.
But you see, we at SES and WAPS, we can also see that there's some gradual shift towards people wanting to consume their content, OTT, and so on. So when you come to us, we're able to do that. We haven't just said that you have to go satellite. We want to get your viewers to watch your content everywhere. So we can understand that, yes, satellite gives you the widest reach, the widest audiences, but there are some consumers who want to watch the content on the bus going to work. They want to watch the content in the smallest room in their home. They want to watch it in the office. So yes, satellite will get you everywhere, but it's also good if you can find yourself on the other media as well, other platforms as well, to really expand your reach and therefore your revenues. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I want to come to Sam. Trace, I know from talking to Olivier, has been quite successful in forming partnerships with mobile operators. Has this been good both in terms of audience and revenue? And take it under those two headings.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Let me come directly to that. Yes, it has been beneficial. It's been challenging, as with most things on the continent. Telcos, are powerful. Some of the most powerful companies in industry on the continent, and therefore over time have grown a certain hubris, understandably, a respected one, right? One that they deserve. But sometimes, I think they're in the process now of contracting back from thinking they can do everything to focusing on what they do, which is voice and data. The discussions sometimes with telcos can go in multiple directions because they think they should be owning the platforms, or for that matter, making the content. But back to more specifically to your question, yes, it's been incredibly fruitful for us. We've generated millions of dollars of revenue from telcos in multiple ways, from sponsorships and advertising to much more integrated projects. When you talk about how we're diversifying our revenue, we have a full-fledged MVNO, which is a mobile virtual network operator, which is taking the value and the audience of our brand and bringing them coming together to bring a telco offering voice and data, but with the glamour and glitz and must-haves of a Trace, the cool and glamour of Trace.
And is that just in South Africa, or is that wider than that?
We've done it in multiple markets and in multiple ways. So an MVNO is not a black and white. It's more of a spectrum, right? So a full MVNO can be what we have closer in South Africa, which is literally SIM cards and selling data and so on, to more bundled packages, etc. So we've done them in a spectrum, in a wide spectrum. And I'd say right now we're actually in a new, probably in the last year, in kind of a new resurgence, not only in Nigeria, but across the continent, on telcos' interest in leveraging on producers, on content in general, to attract their audiences with a lessening demand to be in charge of it or to own it. So it's definitely, telcos are a key partner, but I think that.
So how many people are you reaching through all those diverse mobile?
Absolutely millions, and we do from our telco, from our MVNO in South Africa to multiple bundle deals. We are touching over 15 million customers on a daily basis. Right.
So it's an interesting, entirely new channel that has money attached, notwithstanding the BS that goes with
notwithstanding the channel,
the masters of the universe.
Exactly. One of them are masters of the universe. Benevolent dictators, let's call it.
Exactly.
But I'd like to go further to that point of your more general question, which is, how are we diversifying revenue? How can you diversify revenue? And look, clearly, as I think I referenced before, the democratization of content has happened. Digital is here, and the powerful American platforms, and more so the powerful Asian platforms that will be doing more and more on the continent, from TikTok to WeChat, etc., coming in. And my perspective, or our perspective at Trace, is, yes, sure, these are companies that have incredible capital and incredible understanding and infrastructure and support to capture huge, tens and 20% of global populations. We don't have the muscle to do that. But what can we do? What can we provide to those platforms that they need on a local basis, right? Sure, there's the one, the user generated is, we're not going to do anything about that. But yeah, we're generating user generated content and packaging it in such a way that it's more attractive to those, whether it's playlists or content lists or video lists or whatever it is. So that's been one aspect for us. Definitely telcos and content. Definitely the financial institutions, and from a content point of view, we've seen that trend happen in multiple places around the continent, where they're also getting into making content and making platforms now they're seeing, okay, maybe we need some help from the industry who actually does this. I loved what a few of the things Mark said, although I do have a point of contention with Mark, which I hope you'll let me take on a little bit later, or perhaps we could do it on an offline call, but is dealing with non-traditional brands. It's not just about Coca-Cola and so on. In fact, the marketing spend from non-Western name brands is immense. I don't have the actual data, but my guesstimate is it's actually more in collectivity than the blue chip companies are spending on the continent when it comes to the solar company or whatever it is. And how do you package for that? How do you produce for that? So the more and more local approach, the more and more local and closer you can get to the market, while keeping an eye on the digital and seeing what the digital and kind of the Pan-Africanism, how one can Pan-Africanism and diaspora audiences that we touch on. I think those are the ways is kind of looking at both ends as as a spin out from what we do as our traditional businesses as broadcasters.
Thanks, Sam. Chichi, I want to come to you and ask a question which is sort of based on, in a sense, the InView platform, because the model you have described earlier really is a model to do with mass audience television. It's to do with who's got the most eyeballs. The person with the most eyeballs gets the most money. How does niche broadcasting fit into that? How does the channel for, I don't know, Lagos golfers fit into that model? how do you deal with, the right 100,000 people as opposed to the several million people for a mass channel?
Yeah, so I'll take your example of Lagos golfers. I don't think that I would suggest that someone start a channel for Lagos golfers. I think that for most any channel, I'll go back to what I said in the beginning, right, is approaching it not just because it's content that's quote unquote great or that you like, right, but approaching it from a business standpoint. So the two questions, whether you're a producer, whether you're starting a channel, as a content person, I think you have to ask yourself two questions, right? And these are the kind of things that we would be asking people that want to get on the platform, right? Is what problem are you solving, right? Have you thought about this, right? And what value are you providing, right? And I think that those are the two questions that you, in essence, have to be able to answer. And if you answer that adequately, then you understand where your market is, right? And I think that a lot of times we don't approach it from the purchaser standpoint. So whether the purchaser is the audience or the purchaser is the advertiser, right? Where you have to actually go in with a value proposition in order to make money, even if you're niche. So if you do come to the market and you say, okay, you know what, I want to start a golf channel, right? I think the onus is on us to work with the broadcasters to really think through that, because we want you to be successful. And then the second thing is that if we have an aggregate of content that doesn't really satisfy our audience, then it also hurts our performance. So it's not just about having a lot of channels, but it's about us, once again, also doing the research, knowing where the gaps are, and also helping to advise channels as to what kind of content will work, right? Both from a viewership perspective and secondly, from an advertiser perspective. I know this wasn't a question for me in terms of monetization and ways to make money, but I just want to kind of speak to that just a little bit and talk about the current structure, which is very heavily dependent on, sponsorship, advertising. I think in asking ourselves that question is also to look at, our product and how we can build communities, right? I think that that's one thing that broadcasters don't do enough of. I would say Trace does a good job of that, about having events as a broadcaster and pulling out your audiences to come, and then creating environments where your brands can actually come and activate and feel and see their customer, right? As opposed to, and I think that that's the advantage that an Instagram has or a Facebook has, that I can be watching, let's say I sponsored a show on Facebook Live, I can kind of see exactly who's watching. Well, as a local TV station, you have the capability to provide a atmosphere to get your audience out, right? And especially in Nigeria, where activation is key, people want to move product, right? Do more of those, right? I know COVID will go away eventually, but we can do more of that and show that value to a lot of the brands that want to move their products. And then I think that in addition to just selling airtime and just sponsorship, right? That we can actually take advantage of social media platforms. So even if the numbers don't necessarily exist in the FTA spaces and they're not very accurate, have a very strong digital strategy, right? So you already have an advantage that you're reaching thousands and millions of people every day. Have a very strong digital
old media is usually stronger than new media. It has to be said in the African context.
Exactly. So to use that opportunity and start converting people, because the numbers are growing there, right? So we don't have to, don't start when it's, everyone's on it, right? So yes, Africa's at 20%, but there are a lot of things happening in the tech space and data space that will change the landscape in the next 5 years. One of which is Amazon with its satellites, that it's strictly focused on in this market, right? For them to allow data to be available. That's a huge disruption. So in essence, you have to start building your business for 5 years, 10 years out, right? And start driving your audiences to a digital platform, right? Growing your audiences there, taking that time right now, right? You have that advantage over a YouTube or a Facebook to really have that audience right now and start to drive them there and show those numbers, show that research to your advertisers, right? So start to force that conversation. I know when I was at ABC about, I don't want to date myself, about 20 years ago, we were just starting with apps. And it was not, it was very novel, right? But this was maybe 18 years ago, where in every broadcast, we're like, go to the app, go to the app, go to the app, right? It's very new, but use your platform and start to grow different audiences and start monetizing them, right? And if you can't depend 100% on the research that is so late, right? Start to look at, an integrated approach with your social media, where your content on television is speaking to, telling people go and comment and engage with me on social media, give them some kind of prize or incentive. Those prizes and incentives can be things from your brands, right? And at every point, it doesn't always have to be cash. Offer incentives to just get brands to try you, see a result. If they get results, they will come back, right? And I think that's our biggest thing, is understanding why we're in this business. There are spaces where we can just create content for content's sake and hopefully wait for a big brand like, to buy us. But even in the States, that rarely happens, right? So a lot of times, and the reason why I went back to measurement, research, audience, right? I've sat with brands, I've sat with agencies, and this is the information that they're looking for, right? And they're looking to us to provide that kind of resource so that they can validate their own spend. So we need to work in ways that we can help them buy better and reach their audience better and monetize that and really focus on the business. And that's really why we're in business, right? I know we focus a lot on the content, but our main point is that we're gathering audiences, right? And we want to explain to people that I have the right audience and I'm just using my bait, which is content. So I think a strong focus on audience, right, and their behaviors and their trends, and looking at how you can actually monetize that information speaks. Go ahead. I see someone raising their hand, so I'll stop. But I think that if we start looking at the business from that angle, we'll start to unlock, and it'll also be different conversations that you're having with a lot of the brands that are looking to do business with you.
Who was raising their hand? Because I can't see them.
Wangeci.
I'll come to her in a moment. I think the interesting thing is this thing of communities. And as Mark was saying earlier, language is one of those communities. If you look at the work that, say, Wazobia has done with Pidgin, and the work that, say, Ariwa is doing in northern Nigeria with Hausa, it's precisely that. It's saying, we are a group of people and we are different from another group of people, not in a bad way, but to make absolutely plain that this is a group of people you can identify. They're very particular, they're very specific, and so on and so forth. So Wangeci,
I just think the BBC is doing the same thing as well. And I think that that's something that we should pay attention to as local broadcasters.
Who would you mention?
BBC.
Okay, Wangeci.
I was just raising my hand in support of what Chichi has said, because for me, I think research is very key. And it's one of the things that I don't understand how most content developers, whether you're a broadcaster, free-to-air, OTT, VOD, whatever it is, you go into it without necessarily knowing who your audience is. But most of us, let me put myself in that space, we go into it thinking that this is what the audience was without actual research. I mean, how do you sell a Lamborghini to a 4-year-old? What are they going to do with it unless it's a toy car? And I think that's the mistake that we make from the very beginning, because we don't really understand our audiences and based on our platforms, because we have free to air and we have pay television. So if somebody is going to pay or subscribe to your service or to your platform, then you expect that they will definitely want a lot more. As opposed, I'm not saying that the person who's getting free to air will expect less quality, but there's definitely there's a difference. But nonetheless, I think it's important that we pay attention to what our audiences want. And there's a station here in Kenya that is very popular, that I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. And it's just because they actually took time and invested their time to find out what the audience really wants to watch. And I think it's something that is important going forward, moving into the future of African television, to try and figure out, now that the dynamics are changing, we are moving from this space whereby we are demanding of more local content or demanding of this platform or the other, then I think it's important that then we are cognizant of the fact that we need to pay a lot more attention as to the content that we put out there as broadcasters, because the audience has become very demanding. We cannot push content down their throats anymore. They want to watch and they want to pay what it is that they want to watch for. So I think that I just wanted to support Chichi on that point.
I want to come to Mark, because I sell research and I live off research. So I'm saying this because I think we have to take in account of the realities that we live with. If you go to an advertising agency in Lagos or Accra, the majority of advertising agencies are not really buying based on media planning approaches. A lot of them are buying based on who did you go to school with, which church did you go to, are you going to pay me some kickback from the money, et cetera, et cetera. That's not a media planning approach. So I want to talk, Mark, maybe you can talk us through, think through how we deal with that transition of behavior that needs to occur from in essence, people buying. I remember speaking to one advertiser and I said to him, well, why are you advertising on X radio station? In a very kind of neutral way. And he said, well, we're advertising because we had a conversation around The Office and all of us seem to have heard of it. So Mark, how do we deal with this transition in behavior that's needed to get advertisers into a different place?
Okay. A very difficult question. I think
you're the man for it though, because you're the man with the.
So I'm going to answer the question in a slightly different way. One of the there was a particular broadcaster who didn't want to pay for a production of a show that they wanted, and we felt that it was really important that even if it was $1, it was $100, $100,000, that they paid a contribution towards it, because ultimately the gamut of production to create content requires investment. We try and use this psychology. So we had a sponsor embedded with the show. So our pitch to the broadcaster was, listen, we know you don't want to pay. You actually want us to pay you for the airtime. But we have a sponsor that's on board, that's embedded with our show, who we're going to take to whichever channel we choose to broadcast on. So if we look at this show over maybe 4 or 5 seasons, and we look at the sponsorship revenue, then we'll pay you X percentage of the sponsorship revenue, and you'll take a gamble on that. But you will pay us a minimum guarantee. You will pay us an acquisition fee for the show, because we're not going to come in and buy airtime, because that's a finite transaction, and it's hard to grow that as a business. Moving that psychology back to your question in terms of how do we get the if you could just rephrase it, how do we get the
how do we get the change in behavior from advertising people buying instinctively to actually buying
reaction
rationally?
Buying rationally. I would say that yes, there are many kind of sweetheart deals. My friend looks after these accounts here, and we all know how those deals look. However, I think when the metric changes is when you have a natural change in behavior that's built on a piece of content which is so sticky, which is so much what people want to be associated with, that the advertiser has to come on board because of the success. And I want to give an example. It's quite a contentious issue, and I saw somebody raise it in the questions. There's a question whether the Nollywood of today reflects Nigerian lifestyle, a broad gamut of what's happening in Nigeria, or just one small aspiration of Nigerian life, and whether that is helping Nigerian content or African content sell internationally. Because if you're selling in Nigeria, and you're lucky enough to get $15,000 to $20,000 an hour. You're selling the same show and you're on a network TV in the US getting between $1 and $3 million an hour. You ultimately want to sell your show to as many high-paying countries outside of.
Where do you get this $15,000 to $20,000 an hour?
Yeah. So it could be anywhere between 15.
Some smaller, some.
But there are shows which are commissioned that I can tell you about a show that was recently commissioned in Cameroon at around from a local broadcaster around $150,000 an hour, which is in post-production right now. So there are markets that are reinvesting in content locally. But coming back to the question about the advertisers, and this is something I want to bring back to Nollywood. There were broadcasters in Sierra Leone, broadcasters in Liberia, and broadcasters in Uganda who were looking to buy less Nollywood content and more telenovelas out of Brazil and out of India, because they felt that the familial storylines were not necessarily what they wanted to bring up their next generation on. And that's a very, very important factor, because for so long, Nigeria has led the content production and continues to lead in many areas. But there is an argument to say, are the breadth and the depth of Nollywood stories reflecting what's going in the Niger Delta, reflecting what's going on in Benin, what's going on in different, or is it just in what's going on in Ikwe, and it's just a highlight because the rest of the world is actually watching, and they know that all of Nigerian life is not just about a party. There are many different forms, but there is a proportionately large amount of Nollywood programming that gets advertising dollars that reflects one particular lifestyle. So two really short answers. I think that you have to prove some form of commercial success and then say, listen, this is our discrete audience. These are the people who are following us through our app. These are the people who are following us on our discrete channel. These are the people who are interacting on our social media channels. This is our embedded audience. We want you to scale our audience and invest in making our business bigger and putting advertising dollars in this way. And this is also the message that we're giving to a particular audience. And I want to come back to Chichi's something that we said very quickly about golf and about not necessarily having the market for a golf channel, which I completely agree. But we're having a conversation in South Africa the other day about some niche channels and the fact that somebody who plays golf probably doesn't walk around with his golf clubs and buys a $50,000 SUV. And so the car manufacturer, who will only need to sell 4 or 5 cars, to leverage that investment, might see a really niche channel as being quite valuable. And so aggregating these channels is something that I'm really excited by.
Okay. I want to come on lastly to the, if you like, the regulation piece, the government piece. In my conversations with the many African broadcasters, I spoke to many Nigerian broadcasters, and quite a lot were talking about, oh gosh, we're, state broadcasters talking about we're in terrible financial shape and we need government subsidy and et cetera, et cetera. There's the current fight over the broadcast code. I'm not sure who the best person to take this on is. Obi, I'd like to bring you in. I know you're not on the panel, but it seems to me, talk to the broadcast code, because the questions you were raising were interesting. Talk to it, because I'm not sure necessarily the other people have the same degree of detail you do. So if you could give us a very quick one on that.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure whether I specifically have that detail, but I think what has been going on in Nigeria, there's been a lot of controversy over the last few weeks to months about certain reforms in the broadcast code. Some people have focused on the issues around sports rights and exclusivity. Some producers are focused around whether they will continue to have copyright control over the products of the series and the content that they produce, and they can take them elsewhere. So there's sort of two areas that people seem to be upset about. At the same time, though, I'd really like to hear what the panel thinks about the proposed reform, and also what they think about what Nigeria should be doing. We've also just completed an audience measurement submission, which we are hoping will also come to the party. And if we get the right mix of broadcast reforms and of audience measurement, and then the final element is, how do we protect producers in this whole mix? Because really on the continent, producers are not protected at all. That's what I wanted to find out.
Okay, before we turn to that, I see we have 49 participants. Sadly, I've left less time than I wanted for questions from the audience, but if you put up questions on the chat, I will make sure some of those questions get answered. Chichi, do you want to answer, in a sense, respond to some of the issues that Obi has raised around the broadcast code and protecting producers within that, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll speak to two. One being the sports rights. Why we're up in arms? I mean, yes, change is not comfortable, but sometimes it's needed. And the only statement I would leave for the sports rights, and I'll have it more of a question, is if whether it was Sky in the UK or ESPN, for instance, said, listen, I'm only going to be on Comcast. So if you have Time Warner or Optimum or any of the other people, too bad, right? You just don't get sports in America. So forget about your Super Bowl, forget about your NBA playoffs, forget about, you know, Major League Baseball or whatever, because sorry, you just have to get this one carrier, right? ESPN and most channels that may be owned by a competitive body. So whether Comcast owns NBC or whatever, like NBC won't say, okay, I'm only going to be on Comcast and not Optimum because, right? So I think that it is something to be looked at, right? When it's a channel, right? How that kind of plays so that all parties are satisfied is something that, you know, probably should be, you know, just kind of discussed a bit more. Should rights be warehoused? No, rights should not be warehoused, right? So you can't just buy a right and hold on to it just so that no one else can have it, right? So I think these are just very basic things. One of the ways I think that the NBC code also protects producers in this sense is that, you know, a big challenge is getting paid, right? So whether you're getting paid for work you've done by an agency or a brand, you know, so now it's saying, listen, just pay them in 90 days so they can keep working, right? So if you have the money, pay them. If, you know, if there are no issues with your COTs or your delivery, they ran your spots as is, you know what, whether, you know, they've given you 90 days and said, listen, if you don't pay in 90 days, then you can't advertise at all, right? And so I think that those are some of the measures that I find positive that should help the industry, because 90% of the problem is that if you're a producer, you're just not getting compensated for your work, or you're getting paid so late that now you're in debt and you're paying interest fees that are just ridiculous. So I think those kind of measures should help and continue to, you know, have an ecosystem where money is flowing, especially money that's so tight. Very, very quickly, sorry, I just have to speak to the comment that you made about research. Being in this market for 10 years, I've definitely seen a massive shift from, okay, I'm just going to buy because you're cool, to where are the numbers, right? So I think that brands are a lot more savvy. And especially when you have the digitization where people say, oh, okay, so I can buy here and I can know that 20 million people watched, give me something, right? I need a story behind this buy. Second thing, you know, the onus is once again on the broadcast industry. So if you didn't have proper measurements in place that were recognized, yes. So, you know, things like a high five take the place, right, of a buy, whereas it's not necessarily a more professional conversation. So I think it was in yesterday's discussion, they talked about having like industry publications, right? So whether it's like a Variety or a Hollywood, very quickly, right, that says, hey, listen, this show is #1, right? This show no one's watching. And if that's something that you're putting out every day in front of both brands and agencies, and they're looking at it and saying, okay, this show is doing horrible, right? Why am I spending money? Why call your agency? Why are we here, right? Why are we not in these places? So I think having a neutral party that's assessing the industry every day, talking about what's new, what people are watching, and spreading that information allows brands and agencies to make more informed decisions. Right now, they're just doing it based on trust that it's somebody that I know that hopefully will deliver, right? And I think that, you know, there's a mix, right? That I'm not going to give it to a novice that I've never heard of that may or may not come back with what they promise. So that's my take on those.
I was going to say, can I stop you there? The point about sports rights in Europe is that the European Union intervened to say that the sports rights had to be sold in more than one package. And Dio Oganyemi is making a very similar point here on the chat, saying we need cross-border continent-wide regulations. That's a tough ask when only a handful of countries have effective national frameworks. So I think we're aligned on that one. I'm conscious that we've only got 5 minutes more. So what I'm going to do is Christian has asked a question about the content. He's saying, how do the panelists see the impact of COVID on African broadcast TV? I know Wangeci spoke about increased local collaboration earlier. So if you can all make a very, very short response to that, a one-point response, what's the impact of COVID? One of the conversations we've not had has been about delivering education on television. Theo earlier was talking about his kids doing education online and with broadcasts. So can I start maybe with Wangeci? Can you respond to that impact of COVID?
Well, I think you've kind of alluded to it, because what has happened is a lot of us have come to realize what our likes and dislikes are, you know, especially when it comes to content. So we are realizing that a lot of things that we may not necessarily have watched with our kids or watched on our own, we would want to. So I think this is also one way of us getting feedback from ourselves, informal feedback, and trying to see as producers or as broadcasters what it is that we can be able to bring to reality. But if I might just mention one thing, very quickly, just on IP, I think that is also something that is very important. I know Chichi has alluded to it. It's very important that producers and broadcasters understand the limits that they have when it comes to intellectual property. That is one thing that has never really been brought out clearly. And I fear that if it's not addressed quickly, then we just really may never get to the bottom of it. That's it.
Sam, impact of COVID-19, very quick point.
Yeah, I mean, for us directly, it's been obviously very scary at the beginning. Advertisers all run for shelter. They're all coming back, and the more relevant, data-driven, and cost-effective that will deliver ROI for them.
Okay, Chichi, quick one point.
Very quickly, I think that for some broadcasters that I've been in touch with, I think the reality that they need to restructure their business, which is a good thing, probably just running too heavy, and you can actually be leaner, and looking at technology more closely. So I think that I will look at the positive in terms of how looking to see how you can use technology and other resources to actually run a more profitable business and cut the fat.
Okay, Mark, last point.
Yeah, I think that two things really. I think that one of the things is that some of the impact of COVID will not hit the broadcast industry until the first quarter of next year, because a lot of people were sort of still surviving on income that was coming in from the last 3 quarters. But I definitely see with Chichi there in terms of positively, it's going to make people rely more on technology, more information about their audiences, and how they can deliver really engaging shows that don't necessarily rely on bringing as many people together. So cheaper, more cost-effective shows, which are more highly engaging. So I think that's a great thing.
I'd like to say thank you very much to all the panelists and for all their contributions. I'd like to say thank you to all the participants. We've had over 40 participants on this session. And thank you to both Obi and Nkiru for putting the session
TV,
together.
sir.
Sorry?
Plus Pop Central TV, sir.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And YouTube Live and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But specifically on this Zoom call. So thank you very much indeed to all of you, and have a good evening or have a good day if you're earlier in the day. Take care.
Thank you for
everybody.
moderating, Russell.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Great conversation. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Being off now.
Bye-bye.